I had always known that the mountains could be unforgiving. They demanded respect, patience, and unwavering trust in those who climbed them with you. I thought marriage was the same. For years, my life had been defined by adventure. I was a mountain expedition guide, leading groups across the world's most treacherous peaks. My wife, Emily, stayed home, holding down the fort while I was away. We had an understanding, or so I believed. Then, one evening, that illusion shattered. I had returned home from a 3-week excursion in Patagonia, exhausted but eager to surprise Emily. As I stepped into our house, I heard the familiar rustling of fabric, Emily standing in front of the mirror, adjusting a sleek black dress that clung to her body in ways that weren't meant for my eyes. She barely flinched when she saw me. "Where are you going?" I asked, setting my duffel bag down. My voice carried the exhaustion of the mountains, but something in her demeanor snapped me awake. She turned, meeting my gaze with an almost defiant calm. "I have a date," she said. I laughed. It wasn't a real laugh, more like a breath escaping in disbelief. "With who?" Emily sighed, as if my question bored her. "With someone who makes me feel wanted." The room shrank around me. My pulse roared in my ears. "You're joking." She grabbed a pair of earrings from the dresser, her reflection in the mirror cold and composed. "No, I'm not. I love you, but I need this. I need to feel attractive again. If it goes well, I might stay the night at his place or a hotel." I took a step forward, my body tense. "If you walk out that door, we're done." She hesitated. Just for a second. Then, she picked up her purse, smoothed out her dress, and left. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was suffocating. I stood there, frozen in place, wondering if this was really happening. Wondering how a marriage could unravel in the span of a single sentence. But I already knew. This wasn't the first sign. Just the first one I couldn't ignore. The silence stretched long after Emily left. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the door, half expecting her to walk back in and laugh, tell me it was all a joke. She didn't. Eventually, I moved. Sat down on the edge of our bed, staring at the crumpled sheets, at the life we had built together. It had always been me who left, always for work, always with the promise of coming back. This time, it was her. And there was no promise. I wanted to call someone. But what could I say? "Hey, man. My wife just told me she's going on a date with another guy. What should I do?" It sounded absurd even in my head. Instead, I got up and did the only thing I knew how to do, I packed. Not a bag for an expedition, but for myself. Clothes, essentials, the things I'd need for at least a few days. If she wanted to throw our marriage away like this, I wasn't going to sit around and wait for her to come back with the smell of another man on her. As I zipped up the duffel, my phone buzzed. A text from Emily. "Don't do anything stupid. We'll talk when I get back." I stared at the screen, bile rising in my throat. She thought I would just sit here, waiting. Like some obedient husband, grateful for whatever scraps of affection she decided to toss my way. No. I wasn't waiting. I grabbed my keys, walked out, and drove. Not away from the problem, but toward the only thing I knew would keep me from losing my mind. I needed a plan. I drove aimlessly for a while, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My thoughts were tangled, a mess of anger, disbelief, and something else I didn't want to name. I could have gone to a friend's place, but what would I even say? This wasn't the kind of problem you unloaded over a beer. Instead, I ended up at a cheap roadside motel just outside of town. The kind of place where no one asked questions. The woman at the front desk barely glanced at me as she handed me a key. Room 214. Second floor. The room was small and smelled like stale air and bad decisions. A single lamp flickered against the wall. I tossed my duffel on the bed and sank into the chair by the window. I checked my phone. Nothing. Emily wasn't calling. Wasn't texting. She wasn't even pretending to care where I was. I should have been relieved. If she wasn't trying to fix this, why should I? But all I felt was that gnawing, hollow ache deep in my gut. I had spent years trusting her. Loving her. And she had walked out with barely a glance back. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, staring at my phone, waiting for something, an apology, an explanation, anything. But morning came, and all I had was silence. That's when I made up my mind. Emily had made her choice. Now, it was time for me to make mine. The morning light filtered through the motel's thin curtains, casting long shadows across the room. I hadn't slept, hadn't even closed my eyes. My mind was running on fumes, but my anger kept me awake. I checked my phone again. Nothing. She didn't call. Didn't text. I should have known better than to expect remorse. I showered, changed into fresh clothes, and sat on the bed, staring at the wall. I could go home, pretend nothing happened, wait for her to waltz back in and explain herself. Or I could be done. I picked up my phone and scrolled to our bank account. I wasn't looking for proof of anything specific, just seeing how much she had spent on her little date. A $280 charge at an upscale restaurant. A $500 hotel reservation. And then, something else. A $2,000 withdrawal, just 2 weeks earlier. Why would she need that much cash? I sat up, heart pounding. The dinner, the hotel, I could stomach those. But the money? That was different. That was planning. That wasn't a fling. That was something long-term. I needed answers. But I wasn't going to ask her for them. Instead, I was going to find them myself. I grabbed my keys, checked out of the motel, and drove home. Not to argue. Not to cry. I was done being the naive husband. Now, I was the man she underestimated. And she was about to learn just how much of a mistake that was. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sun was high in the sky, but the house felt empty. Quiet. Her car wasn't there. I stepped inside, half expecting the walls to feel different, tainted somehow. But everything looked normal, too normal. Like she had never left at all. I set my duffel down and walked through the house. If Emily was planning something long-term, she had to be hiding something. I just had to find it. I started with the obvious places, her nightstand, the bathroom, the closet. Nothing. Then, I moved to her office. Emily didn't work from home much, but she had a small desk tucked away in the corner of our guest room. I rifled through drawers, old notebooks, receipts, anything that might give me a clue. And then I found it. Tucked behind a stack of old paperwork was an unmarked envelope. Inside, 2 things. A hotel keycard. And a doctor's appointment slip. I frowned, turning the slip over in my hands. The date was just a week ago. OB-GYN. My breath caught in my throat. No. No, no, no. I dropped the paper like it burned me. My hands were shaking. It couldn't be. She couldn't be. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, my pulse roaring in my ears. Was she pregnant? And if she was it mine? I clenched my fists, forcing myself to breathe. I needed to know the truth. And I needed to hear it from her. I sat there for a long time, staring at that doctor's appointment slip, my mind unraveling at a pace I couldn't control. Pregnant. Emily and I hadn't been trying for a baby. In fact, we had barely been intimate in the last few months before this disaster. I could count on one hand the number of times we'd slept together recently. Which meant The odds weren't in my favor. A sickness twisted in my gut, a realization that clawed at my chest. If she was pregnant, there was a good chance, no, a very real chance, that it wasn't mine. I exhaled sharply, pushing away the wave of nausea building inside me. I needed to keep my head straight. I reached for the hotel keycard. It was a generic one, no hotel name printed on it. But I knew Emily's usual spots when she traveled for work. I grabbed my phone and checked the bank app again. There. A hotel charge, posted the morning after she left me standing in our home, after she walked out to be with him. I clenched my jaw and tapped on the transaction details. Granville Suites. That was all I needed. The drive to the hotel felt like an out-of-body experience. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I wasn't the clueless fool sitting at home, waiting for his wife to decide if she still wanted him. I was a man who had been deceived. A man hunting for the truth. By the time I walked into the hotel lobby, I had already rehearsed my next move. I stepped up to the front desk, keeping my expression neutral. "Hey," I said, forcing a friendly tone. "I think I left something in my wife's room a couple of nights ago." Emily Carter. She was here recently. The receptionist barely looked up. "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't give out guest information." I smiled, leaning in slightly. "Come on, man. It's just a charger. You don't have to tell me her room number. Just confirm if she checked out yet." The receptionist hesitated. His eyes darted to his screen, then back to me. "She checked out yesterday," he finally said. I forced my face to remain calm, even though my blood was boiling beneath the surface. Yesterday. Not Sunday afternoon, like she told me. She had stayed longer. With him. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Thanks," I muttered before walking away. I made it back to my truck before the rage hit me full force. Emily had lied to my face. She didn't just walk out on our marriage, she had slept over with him. An entire night. Maybe two. And now she might be pregnant. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I had spent years scaling mountains, braving storms, surviving treacherous conditions that would have killed weaker men. But nothing, felt as brutal as this. I needed to confront her. I needed her to look me in the eye and admit the truth. So I drove home. And I waited. She walked in a few hours later, casual as ever, as if she hadn't just obliterated everything we built together. She froze when she saw me sitting on the couch, my hands clasped together, the hotel keycard and doctor's slip lying on the coffee table in front of me. Her eyes flicked from the evidence to my face, her expression shifting just slightly. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice low. Emily set her purse down carefully, like she was choosing every move with precision. "Out," she said. "Why?" I exhaled slowly, nodding. "Okay. Then let's try something else." I pointed at the papers. "What's this?" Her gaze didn't waver. "It's private." I let out a bitter laugh. "Private? You walked out on me, told me you were going on a date with another man, and now you expect me to accept secrets?" She sighed, crossing her arms. "Blake, Are you pregnant?" I cut in, my voice sharp. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. And in that moment, I knew. A slow, sickening realization crept in. She wasn't just unfaithful. She had been reckless. Possibly carrying another man's child. I stood up, the chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Is it mine?" Her mouth opened, then closed. She didn't answer. And that silence told me everything. Something inside me snapped. The silence between us stretched, thick and suffocating. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line, her shoulders tightening. She wasn't answering me. Which meant she already knew. I took a slow, measured breath, trying to keep myself from completely losing it. How long? My voice was steady, but the rage simmered beneath the surface, barely contained. Emily swallowed, finally looking away. Blake. How long? She hesitated. A few months. I felt the weight of those words hit me like a landslide. A few months. That meant she had been sneaking around while I was away on expeditions, building a second life behind my back. Who is he? I demanded. Her arms wrapped around herself, a defensive gesture. It doesn't matter. I let out a bitter laugh. Doesn't matter? You're standing in our home, pregnant with his child, and you think it doesn't matter? Emily flinched at my words, but she didn't deny them. That was all the confirmation I needed. I stepped back, shaking my head, trying to process the complete betrayal that had just unfolded in front of me. You knew, didn't you? I said, my voice eerily calm. You knew this wasn't my child. And you weren't even going to tell me, were you? She finally looked at me again, her expression somewhere between guilt and defiance. I don't know for sure, she admitted. But, it's possible. The room felt too small, too suffocating. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. I was gone. Working. Providing for us. And this is what you did? Tears welled in her eyes, but I had no sympathy left. Blake, I never planned for this to happen. She trailed off, her breath hitching. You chose this, I spat. You walked out that door and didn't even look back. She wiped at her face, like she had any right to cry right now. I made a mistake, she whispered. I let out a slow, humorless chuckle. No, Emily. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is leaving the stove on. What you did? That's a choice. And now you want to stand here and act like I should just accept this? She shook her head quickly. No, I don't expect that. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. Every part of me wanted to walk out that door and never come back. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I pointed at her stomach. Does he know? She hesitated. No. I nodded slowly. And were you ever planning to tell him? She didn't answer. Unbelievable. So let me get this straight, I said, stepping closer. You were going to let me believe this was my child. Let me raise another man's baby while you carried on pretending like nothing happened. Emily's chin trembled. I don't know what I was going to do. I stared at her, and for the first time, I realized something terrifying. She never planned for me to find out. If I hadn't come across that doctor's slip, if I hadn't dug through her things, she would have lied to me. 4 months. Maybe years. My stomach twisted. You're disgusting, I muttered. Emily gasped, her expression breaking into one of pure hurt. Blake. No, I snapped. You don't get to cry. You don't get to act like you're the victim here. She bit her lip, shaking her head. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but... But what? I cut in. You want me to just move on? To play happy husband while you give birth to another man's child? I don't expect anything from you, she whispered. I stared at her for a long moment. Then, without another word, I turned and walked away. I drove. I didn't know where I was going, I just needed to get out of that house. The betrayal sat in my chest like a stone, pressing harder with each passing second. She had destroyed our marriage. She had destroyed me. And yet, she had the audacity to stand there, acting like she didn't know what to do. Like this was just a mistake. No. This was planned. Thought out. She had been careful, until she got caught. And now she was scrambling. But she wasn't getting away with this. Not without consequences. Not without paying for what she did. I pulled into an empty parking lot and leaned my head back against the seat, closing my eyes. I needed to think. I needed to come up with a plan. Because Emily was about to learn. I wasn't the kind of man you betrayed and walked away from unscathed. I sat in my truck for what felt like hours, staring blankly at the dashboard, my mind running in 1,000 directions. Emily had cheated. Lied. Betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. And now, she was carrying another man's child. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. The anger inside me burned, hot and relentless. But anger alone wasn't enough. I needed justice. No, I needed revenge. And it had to be something that cut deep. Something that left a scar, just like the one she had given me. I unlocked my phone and started making a list of everything I had against her. She cheated. She's pregnant. She planned to make me raise another man's kid. She never even told the guy she was sleeping with. That last one stuck in my mind. He didn't know. Which meant Emily had two people she was deceiving, not just me. I exhaled slowly, the gears in my head turning. I needed to find him. I needed to tell him. And once I did, I would let the two of them rip each other apart. The next morning, I started digging. Emily had been careful, but not careful enough. I went through our phone records, checking the most frequent calls she had made in the last few months. One number stood out, a number she had been calling at all hours, especially when I was away on expeditions. I punched the number into Google, hoping for a quick hit. Nothing. I frowned. If it wasn't a business, it had to be a personal line. I considered calling, but I didn't want to tip him off. Instead, I went back to my first lead, the hotel. Emily had stayed at Granville Suites, which meant whoever she was seeing had likely been there with her. I parked in front of the hotel and walked inside, my pulse steady despite the storm raging inside me. The receptionist from the day before was still there. I smiled politely. "Hey, man. I had a question, kind of a weird one." He gave me a wary look. "Go on." "My wife stayed here recently," I said. "Emily Carter. I know you can't give me guest information, but I just need to confirm something." He hesitated. "I really can't share." "I don't need a room number," I interrupted. "I just need to know if she was alone." The receptionist exhaled, tapping his fingers against the desk. I pulled out a $100 bill and slid it across the counter. "Just a yes or no." He eyed the cash, then glanced around before lowering his voice. "She wasn't alone." I nodded, as if I hadn't just felt another knife sink into my chest. "Did she check in with him?" The receptionist hesitated. "No. She came in first. He showed up later." I clenched my jaw. "She pay for the room?" I asked. "She did. Of course she did." I forced a tight smile. "Thanks, man." I left the hotel with one more confirmation: Emily had been protecting this guy. She was the one making all the moves, handling the money, making sure no one found out. Which meant he wasn't just some random fling. He was someone with something to lose. That night, I waited for Emily to fall asleep before I made my next move. Her phone was charging on the nightstand. I picked it up, my heart hammering as I entered her passcode. The lock screen flashed open. I went straight to her messages. And there he was. Nathan. I clicked on the conversation, scrolling through months of messages. I expected passion. Love notes. Some kind of deep emotional connection. But what I found was worse. "Nathan, are you sure this isn't a bad idea?" "Emily, stop worrying. No one will find out." "Nathan, I just can't risk my wife finding out. You know how bad that would be." "Emily, you're overthinking again. I'll handle everything." I inhaled sharply. He was married. Of course he was. That's why Emily had kept things quiet. Because this wasn't just an affair, it was a full-blown double life. Nathan had as much to lose as she did. And now, I had exactly what I needed. I spent the next morning tracking down Nathan. It wasn't hard. His name, along with his workplace, was in one of Emily's texts. He was a corporate lawyer. A man with a reputation. A man who, if exposed, would lose everything. I pulled into the parking lot of his office and waited. At 11:30 sharp, I spotted him. A tall man, neatly dressed in a tailored suit, walking toward his car. I stepped out of my truck, intercepting him before he could open his door. "Nathan?" I asked casually. He froze, turning to look at me. "Yes." I smiled. "We need to talk. About Emily." His expression flickered, shock, then panic. "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone, opened the screenshots of his texts, and held it up to his face. The color drained from his skin. I leaned in slightly, keeping my voice low and calm. "You have two choices, Nathan." He swallowed hard, gripping his briefcase. "What do you want?" I smirked. "Simple. You tell your wife before I do. And when you do, make sure Emily knows exactly how this is about to blow up in her face." Nathan's eyes darted around, his entire body stiff with fear. She never told me she was pregnant," he stammered. I tilted my head. "Well, now you know." He took a shaky breath, rubbing a hand over his face. "Jesus Christ." I patted his shoulder. "Good luck, buddy." Then I turned and walked away, feeling something I hadn't felt in days. Satisfaction. Emily thought she had control. She thought she could cheat, lie, and walk away unscathed. But now, her world was about to come crashing down. And I was going to enjoy every second of it. Nathan was rattled. I could see it in the way he gripped his briefcase like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "Tell her," I repeated. "Or I will." Then I walked away, leaving him to deal with the bomb I had just dropped. I didn't need to stick around to see the fallout. I knew exactly how this would play out. Nathan would go home, panic twisting in his gut. His wife would see through whatever weak excuse he tried to make. And eventually, he'd break. The truth would come out. And then, Emily's carefully built lies would come crashing down. That evening, Emily came home late. Her face was pale, eyes darting nervously. "Nathan's wife called me," she whispered, setting down her purse. I didn't respond. Just watched her. "She knows." I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. "Good." Emily swallowed hard. "You did this." I shrugged. "You did this to yourself." Her breath hitched, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of losing me, fear of consequences. And that was exactly what I wanted. Emily stood there, frozen, her breath shallow. "Blake, we can fix this." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Fix this? You cheated, lied, and tried to trap me with another man's baby." Tears welled in her eyes. "I never meant." "Stop." I held up a hand. "You meant every step. You just never thought you'd get caught." She flinched. "What now?" I exhaled, feeling something close to relief. It was finally over. "You pack your things," I said evenly. "You leave. And you don't come back." She opened her mouth, then closed it, realizing there was nothing left to say. An hour later, she was gone. I stood by the window, watching her car disappear down the street. I had lost my wife, my marriage, the life I thought I knew. But as the silence settled around me, I realized something. I hadn't lost myself. And that was the only thing that mattered.